The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Today's episode is Surviving Spiritual Trauma.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Franson, and I'm here with Alysha Lee. And I think that's your middle name, right?
It's my maiden name, but
Maiden
we can go with it. It's fine.
We had this discussion, I believe, because my sister's middle name is May. I think we talked about this earlier, but welcome to the studio, Alysha. We did the sneak peek a few weeks ago. We've just been having a great conversation about your topic today. And for those who saw you on the sneak peek, you have a very interesting background, personal trauma, and yet your beliefs and your commitment to God and your faith have led you to some interesting conclusions about healing, identity, that we want to share with the audience this morning. This show is being pre-recorded, and I believe it's scheduled to air on a Sunday morning here coming up very soon. So whatever date it is, we worked all those details out. So Alysha, tell us a little bit about your early life's experience. The show is called Created in the Image of God. How were you created? Who were your parents? What was the environment you grew up in?
Yeah, thank you, Wade. It's so great to be here. I'm so excited that you created this space, and I'm just happy to be here to share my story. So thank you again. Yes, I am born and raised in beautiful Colorado Springs, Colorado. Just me and my older brother and my two parents, and we attended church every single Sunday. Grew up in a very Christian home, and I still do identify with the church and as a Christian, but my
Which particular church was that? Sorry to interrupt. Which particular church was that you grew up in?
Yeah, I grew up in the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So, and my view really shifted. I think a lot of my early beliefs did stem from just feeling like God was a lawmaker and a checklister and someone that I had to just follow out of fear and obligation. And I think just a lot of my early upbringings just kind of led me to that conclusion. And I think also in church culture, there's a pretty strong pressure to marry young, and I did fall into that. And unfortunately for me, it didn't work out, and I wasn't ready. But I felt like I was checking the box that marrying young would check the box and would make God happy, and that even though in my heart I felt like there was something off about this, I saw all my friends around me doing it, going off to college and getting married young. And I felt like this is what God wanted me to do. And obviously I felt some tugs on my heart a little bit telling me that maybe this wasn't right. But I continued forward because I hadn't had the conviction yet that I could receive that personal revelation for myself.
So that's a really interesting conundrum that we all have, right? So
yeah,
I believe in something called progressive revelation. If you look at the Bible, when God spoke to Adam and Eve, there were certain important foundational principles. Then you have Noah, where things went so far off track that God, started over, right? He expanded through Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. And then he consolidated everything back down to Noah and his family. Then he expanded again through Abraham I will make you the father of many, many nations. And then he consolidated through Moses very specific laws, a postage stamp sized piece of real estate and a city on a hill. And then comes Jesus, preach the gospel to the world and consolidate the commandments down into love towards your fellow man and love towards God, magnifying the law and making it honorable, and also making it, in a sense, simpler, but so much more complex. My point here is that every one of us grows up needing those rules, needing those laws. I personally find it very important to set clear rules for your children when they're young and not give them too many choices. You start giving them more choices as they grow older, and you teach them how to make good choices, right? And then when they become teenagers, you can't control them. If you do it the other way, you give them too many choices when they're young, and then you try to tamp it down and lock it down, you get teenage rebellion, right? So the order is you give the rules and you teach obedience and submission early to the parents who know better and protect the children, keep them from running out in the road, putting their hands on hot stoves, putting knives in electrical light sockets, whatever it is that kids do. And then you give them freedom, right? So, but as young teenagers, sorry for the monologue, as young teenagers, we're not really capable of yet knowing everything. Our brains are not even fully developed, right? And yet we're forced to make choices at a young age. And increasingly, kids are exposed to all kinds of things at an age that's way too young. So this is a complex challenge. How did you work through all that as you went through your marriage, and what were some of the realizations that you had as God began to expand your understanding?
Yeah, no, I definitely believe that. I mean, I agree with your analogy there that small children do need a lot of rules. And then you hope that as you are teaching kids within your home, that you are teaching correct principles, and then they learn to govern themselves. But I do feel like there also needs to be a lot of counsel as well. And I think that was just one thing, no fault of my parents or anyone else, but I just didn't really feel like I had a lot of counsel, or I didn't have like a safe space to really talk about what I was going through or what I was experiencing. And I know that when I was courting my ex, there were a lot of red flags that would pop up, but there just wasn't the open communication to chat about it. Or someone would say something like, he's very protective of you. And I was 19 at the time. To me, that sounded okay, that someone was protective of me. Don't you want someone to be protective of you? But what they were really trying to say with not so little words is, he's a little bit crazy and obsessed with you and controlling. And to a 19-year-old, you just got to come out and say it. And I think I wish that someone would have come out and said it. I mean, maybe, who knows, that you can't go back and you can't predict what would have happened, but maybe it would have changed something. Maybe it wouldn't have. You just never know. But for me, I did feel like there was a lot of rules growing up, and I was able to make decisions for myself now that I was a legal adult. And for me, I decided, okay, I'm going to get married, and love is going to conquer all, and God's going to see us through this because we are members of this church, and we're going to continue to do what's right. But unfortunately, love doesn't always conquer all, and God does give you agency, but at the same time, you don't get to choose your consequences to your actions. So things started to spiral pretty quickly out of control, despite my best efforts and attempt to live a godlike marriage and live this eternal marriage. And things started to spiral pretty quickly. And again, I didn't have a safe space per se to turn to really talk about what I was experiencing. And I think that's when it got worse.
And so I don't want you to share any details that you don't feel comfortable sharing, but was there then physical abuse? What led to the next steps that you had to take, and what were they?
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely a combination of all of it. I think the biggest thing, we were still pretty young. I mean, he was about 5 years older than me, but he was still in school and I was in school. I had just started college, and we were living in a condo that my parents actually owned at the time, and we weren't paying rent. They were just letting us live there. And school was about to start, and I'd registered for classes. And I remember turning to him and asking him what classes he was taking. And come to find out, he wasn't taking any classes because he had an honor code violation and gotten kicked out of school. So that was kind of the first set of lies that that I uncovered, that he didn't really have a plan moving forward, didn't have a job. He was kind of working on a side little gig business that really thought was going to take off, but didn't, and wasn't really to put forth a lot of effort there. And so here I am trying to go to school. He's kicked out of school. He doesn't have a job or any money. So we're slowly just kind of losing all the extra money that we had saved up, or that I had saved up from working over the summer. And just things kind of started to spiral out of control. Once he figured out that I wasn't really going along with this game, he kind of put some extra boundaries on me. He followed my schedule down to a T, and he knew that my classes ended, say, at 3:00. And if I was home later than 3, if it was like 5 or 10 minutes after, it would just get pretty bad. It was paranoia. Who were you talking to? What's going on? There was one point when my mom hadn't heard from me in a few weeks, and she actually ended up calling me, and I answered my phone, and I stepped out of the condo for just a second to chat with her. And I didn't know it at the time, but he had followed me, and I was just trying to talk to my mom, and I started crying because things were getting so bad with just the control, and there was some physical abuse and emotional abuse and a lot of mental abuse at the time. And I just started bawling, and I turned around, and he was standing there, just eyes bloodshot red. And I basically just said, "Mom, I got to go." And he grabbed my phone, and that was the last time that I'd seen it. He took it and put some controls on it and hid it away in some kind of drawer. We had a second bedroom, and he had made it into his office, and I'm not really sure what he did in there, but he would just lock himself in there all day. And my phone was somewhere in there, locked in a drawer, but he felt like he couldn't trust me with a phone, so he took it away and locked it.
So he had the time to spend most of his time controlling you.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So what steps did you then take eventually?
So I mean, I was just paranoid at this time. I didn't want to do anything to walk on eggshells, because he was a lot bigger than me, and I was scared of him. I was scared if I did anything wrong that there would be ramifications to pay, and I didn't want to step outside this little bubble that he created for me. So I followed his checklist pretty down to the T. And eventually, when my mom hadn't heard from me in a while, and this was their condo that we were living in, my parents actually sought out some legal advice to figure out, hey, like, we just want to go talk to our daughter, and what are our rights to, like, evict a person if necessary, and there's squatters' rights and all this stuff. But anyway, the long story short is that they ended up seeking a local sheriff. And one Saturday morning, my mom and dad and this local sheriff knocked on my door, and I answered it. And I mean, my face just went like ghost white. I was like, "What are you guys doing here? This is not the time. If he sees you, there's going to be so much hell to pay." He was already in this mindset that everyone around me was brainwashing me, and that everyone was bad for our relationship, and that they didn't understand our relationship, and that we're working through kinks. But this is just a few months into our marriage, and there's already so much control and manipulation and lies. And it's just not a good situation. So anyway, the sheriff kind of steps in, and he basically asks my husband at the time to step outside, and so that my parents can come in and chat with me for a few minutes. And they kind of tell me, this is a bad situation, and we just want you to come home for just a little bit, just to kind of figure out what is happening and what is actually going on and see with clear eyes. And basically I got 5 minutes to grab just a few things, and decided that I was going to go home with them for a little bit. And out of the kindness of their hearts, they let him stay because he had nowhere else to go. And so I went home, and it was just going to be for a little bit. And then some other things happen where the story takes a big twist.
Well, we're going to go to a quick commercial break, which will most likely be about Alysha. This is a pre-recording. I can't tell you exactly what it is, but when we come back, we'll continue with this story and talk about the resolution and some details behind it, and then what comes next. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Alysha Lee on Created in the Image of God.
Some moments change you forever. And some, you don't realize they've changed you until years later. If you've ever wondered how to hold on when everything around you is shifting, if you've ever searched for yourself in the middle of chaos, or felt the quiet ache of missing something you didn't even know you lost, my story might feel a little like yours. It's about the moments that break us and the moments that remind us we're still whole, even in the pieces. Everything I Might Have Missed, a memoir about finding beauty in the broken pieces. About the laughter, the heartbreak, the lessons, and the love that shaped us into who we are, is now available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Franson. I'm here with Alysha Lee. Right before the break, we were talking about the intervention that led to her moving back to her parents. Her husband was still living in the condo, but then there was a twist. Some things happened, you mentioned. So what was that twist? What happened? And how did this situation eventually get resolved?
Yeah. So eventually, I was planning on just going home for a little bit and then potentially going back to school. I had been accepted into a different college at the time, and felt like I wanted to try something new. So I prayed about it, and I talked to I come to the conclusion that I wanted to go there. And so I told my husband at the time that I was going to do this, and I just needed a little more time. And he honestly took it pretty well. I thought, until one day I got a text message from him, and it was so nice and so sweet, I thought. And he just wanted to send off on a good note. And I felt like, again, in my 19-year-old brain, 20, I guess at the time, that I owed it to him, that I had married this person and started to share my life with him, and that we could send off on a good note. And so I told my parents I was going to see one of my friends, and I hopped in my car, and I met him at this place, this spot that we were going to have lunch. And he was in his truck, and it was kind of pulled over to the side of the building, and kind of the back of the building, I guess. And he walked over to my car, and he said, "Hey, I actually want to take you to a really nice lunch spot. Can I drive, just because it's kind of a surprise?" So we're in my car, and I scoot over to the passenger seat. And to make the long story short, we never stop for lunch. We keep driving. And after a while, I start getting really panicked. And at this point, we're like all the way almost to Denver. And like, hey, how long is this going to be? Like, where are we going? And I'm starting to panic. And he essentially, well, for all intents and purposes and legally, abducts me when you take a person across state borders, which we eventually went from Colorado to Wyoming to Utah. He abducted me and again took my phone, called a mutual friend, said, hey, she changed her mind. She's coming back with me. She made a mistake. Her family's toxic. They're brainwashing her, yada, yada, yada. And long story short, no one hears from me for over a month. I miss my school. The school's wondering where I am, why I didn't show up. My parents at this point, I mean, I'm over 18 and I'm legally married to this person. So there's not a whole lot they can do. I mean, again, they seek legal advice, but they don't, I mean, the only thing that they're told is she's an adult and this sounds like she made her decision. Everyone at this point thinks it was my decision, that I had thought I made a mistake. So I'm basically stranded and stuck with him for about a month. Eventually I do get out by the grace of God. There's a whole story there too, but just do know that I do eventually make it out of there.
So, and you've written a book, Everything I Might Have Missed, described as a deeply personal memoir. I assume that for those who want to know, there's more detail there about those various stories. Is that fair?
Yeah. If you want to hear the whole thing, it's all in the book.
Everything I Might Have Missed, and I'm assuming that's available on Amazon and elsewhere.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Yeah, there's paperback and Kindle and ebook. Yeah.
Great. So eventually, I assume you were able to divorce him and move on legally as well. Tell us about that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, after someone abducts you and basically, chooses your life for you, I didn't really have any say in any of this. He chose this for me because he, quote, thought it was best for us. Once I eventually do make it back, I mean, divorce is not even a question at this point. I mean, in Colorado, it's a no fault state. So he didn't even have to show up to court. We just got an attorney. And after hearing my story, the judge granted me a restraining order. There's a warrant out for his arrest because, again, when you take a person across state borders without their consent, it's an abduction. And so there's a warrant out for his arrest. We move forward with the divorce. I'm pretty much shattered and have no idea which way is up, which way is down. Trust issues up the wazoo. I mean, I'm going through therapy. I'm struggling. I'm angry at everyone, especially God, because I felt like, I was following everything you wanted me. And now look where I am. I'm just a really hurt, angry person.
So we'll get to the moving on, how you came through that, what you learned, but I want to go back first a little bit, because I assume that during this time, your husband was still ostensibly a member of the church.
Technically speaking, yeah. As far as any of the doctrine is concerned, I don't think he was interested in any of that. I mean, and the LDS Church has a lot of stipulations for active members as far as, we have something called the Word of Wisdom. And I mean, he was basically getting drunk every weekend with his friends, and tobacco. I mean, he would dip and do, drugs.
So he was not, he might have been a member in name, but he was taking that name in vain and breaking the rules and laws.
Right. Not an
and
active.
Openly, publicly, and privately, and in every way.
Yeah.
So are you still a member of the LDS Church today?
Yeah, I actually stepped away for a little bit and tried to figure out where I wanted to be and what my relationship with God is. But I do consider myself an active member of the church. I did eventually come back and have found just a lot of joy and peace once I started to actually understand what my relationship with God is, and how it doesn't necessarily have to fit in this perfect box.
Well, and I shared with you that one of the first girlfriends I had briefly
Yeah.
in high school was a girl, an LDS girl. We later connected afterwards. There's a story in my book, People to Sign, about how she became Miss Alaska, and I actually ran into her almost literally because I was driving in my car and she was jogging
Wow.
in a neighboring city, and I recognized her and I pulled in front of her, terrified her, jumped out and said, "Hi, it's me." And we hugged, and she was all
Wow.
sweaty from jogging, and we went out on a couple of dates
Yeah.
while she was Miss Alaska. And I had so much admiration for that church because of the warm family relationships, right? And many years later, this was because my daughter had a piano teacher who was an LDS woman. She invited us to attend the church, and I'd never been to a service, and I was literally in tears because of the beauty and the submission of to God, and the dedication, the obedience to the laws and commandments that were understood. But to your point, if those are not understood properly, right? This is why Jesus came, to magnify the law and make it honorable, to teach the purpose of the law, the intent of the law, because the religious leaders of his day were using the law. The symbol in the Bible, I think it's in the book of Mark, they washed their hands with a fist. And I won't go into unpacking what that means and how and whatnot, but essentially they used the law as a weapon against the people to subjugate the people. And I'm not saying that any church consciously does that, but it can be the effect, and it can be the effect in the minds of some people. And apparently your husband had some of that, that subjugation, right? To use the law to control other people rather than as a means to understand our own purpose, our own identity with God. So I want to just make some of those comments. Tell us then now what you're doing now and how you're using all these experiences now in your work and what you're doing these days.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It is interesting because God is a perfect being, and how incredibly frustrating it must be that all he has to work with here on earth is imperfect people. And so trying to separate.
When you have kids, you kind of begin to understand some of that. I joke that teenagers are God's revenge because we create them and then they grow up and pretend we don't exist.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Not quite there yet with my kiddos, but I'm sure we will be. But yeah, just being able to separate the people, or even the church, because every religion has its own culture per se, and being able to separate those things from the actual relationship that I have with God the Father was a big step for me. Sometimes, everywhere you go in life, you can meet someone that will offend you. And I think there's a lot of things, especially when I was going through this divorce, and I think especially in church, or at least in the LDS culture, it was pretty taboo to get divorced, and especially at such a young age when I had just barely started. And I felt like everyone was like, how could you have messed this up so bad? You barely even started. How did things go so wrong so fast? And I just felt like I'm not saying this is true, but I felt like everyone was judging me and looking at me like I was a failure. And so that really kind of changed my perspective of church. And I just didn't feel like it was a place I wanted to be until I understood that my relationship with God has nothing to do with what anyone else thinks or what anyone else's opinion of me is. That God knows me, and that he is so aware of my needs and what I'm going through, that I can separate the people and the culture from God, because they are separate. And again, I mean, all he has to deal with is imperfect people, and imperfect people are always going to make mistakes and come across, sometimes come across a way that seems offensive or whatever. But once I understood that my relationship with God is personal and that he descended so far below anything that I can ever experience, even when I was in the midst of everything I went through, all the pain and the sorrow and the hurt and the anger, that he had already paid the price for all of that. So I didn't have to hold on to that burden that I was carrying, that I could walk with him through it so that he could get me out of it and have that relationship with him.
Yeah, Jesus lowered himself. There's that famous verse, let this mind be in you, which was in Christ Jesus. And the King James, who thought it not robbery to be equal with God. Not what it means is a thing not to be grasped, held on to, that position, that prestige. He let go of it all and humbled himself to become one of us and to be despised by us. And even though he was perfect, to be crucified. None of us have experienced it to that degree. But I want to talk just very briefly about personal responsibility, because clearly some of the way in which you were educated as a child, not pointing any fingers at parents or church or whatever, but some of the things that you adopted led to even choices as a young adult, right? We talked about that in the first segment or before the show about how it's a challenging thing to give kids rules and then nurture them so that they can grow and make wise choices in the right way. And none of us will ever do it perfectly. And we have to honor our father and mother. That's one of the commandments, no matter how bad parents they were, right? Or good or whatever. But still, when you mentioned that you told your parents you were going to see a friend, it wasn't a friend, it was your husband. So obviously you didn't really feel comfortable telling them the truth, if that was accurate description. So how do you see your own responsibility, and how do you process that? I mean, you mentioned therapy, so obviously there are reasons for that. I'm not blaming you. Clearly you were a victim, but we all play a part. We all make certain choices. This is the hard thing for children, because they might have been the one that got in the car with that abductor, and they might feel guilty about that their whole life, because the classic case, the abductor offered them candy and they went for it. And somebody had maybe told them, don't take candy from strangers, but they did anyway. You know what I mean? And it's not their fault, but they made the choice in that moment, right? It's not your fault, but you did tell your parents, I'm going to see a friend. So how do you process that part of it?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely changed the way that I parent. I feel like growing up, and again, no fault to my parents, they are lovely and wonderful people, and everyone has their own way to parent, but I feel like my personal upbringing, there just wasn't a lot of open communication. It was like, these are the rules and this is what you'll follow and this is what you'll do, and there wasn't a lot of well what will happen if I don't, or there wasn't a lot of space for question and answer. And I think a lot of what my parents' theory was that if we take the kids to church every week, that the church will kind of handle everything and they'll grow up and do just fine and be just fine. And I think now that I'm a mom and I have 3 little girls, which is terrifying, but also the greatest joy in my life, is that I open those lines of communication so that when they are struggling or when something doesn't make sense, or like, I really want to do this, but mom says I shouldn't, it's not just like rote memorization or rote obedience. It's like, okay, let's have a conversation of why. And yes, you still have agency, but this is why I'm saying that this probably isn't the best idea. And just opening those lines of communication, so that I think people naturally want to be free, and with freedom sometimes can look like rebellion because they want to be able to make their own choices. being able to open those lines of communication and just being able to have an honest conversation about things. I always use a classic example, like growing up, my parents never sat down and had the sex talk with me. And I don't know, maybe that's not a perfect example, but it's just, they didn't want to have uncomfortable conversations, where now that I've been through so much, I'm like, uncomfortable conversations need to happen, and they need to start at a young age so that kids feel comfortable having a conversation. If my kids are ever in trouble, if they've done something that I told them a million times not to do, if they're at a party and I told them not to go to that party, I want them to still be able to call me and be like, hey mom, I messed up, and can you come pick me up? Of course. And let's talk about it in the morning, and I feel like I didn't get a lot of those conversations growing up. It was like, we'll go to church and you'll learn what you need to learn. And that's that.
Wow. Very powerful testimony that you're providing, and deeply insightful. We're going to go to a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Alysha Lee.
Welcome to the Royal Falcon Foundation. Our curriculum and activities inspire and train adolescents through hands-on experiences, fostering growth and empowerment. Through immersive and challenging experiences, we shape young minds to think independently and develop their leadership skills. Our programs foster new friendships and unity, shaping young leaders to tackle real-world challenges with confidence. We believe in equipping the next generation with the skills to become leaders of tomorrow. Join us at the Royal Falcon Foundation and be part of a journey that empowers, unites, and inspires. Double your impact with our matching grant. Until the end of 2025, every tax-deductible donation to the Royal Falcon Foundation, up to $1,000, will be matched dollar for dollar. Visit our website to donate now, or email info@royalfalconfoundation.org for more details. Together, we can make a greater difference.
Welcome back to Creating the Image of God with Alysha Lee. We're in the final segment, the home stretch here, really getting into the meat of her message. Based on all of her experiences that she's shared in such a personal way, we're now talking about how she's addressing this with her own children, and probably in conversations with others as she talks about her experiences and uses them to the benefit of others. So you were just talking about making sure that, these are my words now, that you invest the right amount of time, quality time, and also the right approach in developing a deep and profound relationship with your children. Because ultimately, we need to become young adults, with the emphasis on adult, not young adults with the emphasis on young and inexperienced, right? We need to have achieved that depth of maturity of relationships, because our challenges are really going to come with and from other people, not necessarily just the physical circumstances and the career. It's always the people, and we need to have the maturity to deal with these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is the interesting thing about life. It's like the very worst parts about life are the people. In my case, obviously, I had some pretty bad encounters with the story I shared, but on the other hand, the very best parts about life are the people. And we're going to meet good and bad people our whole life. And just knowing how to navigate that, and knowing how to brush some things aside, and also knowing how to ask for help when you need help, or to talk about things when you want to talk about them, I think is really important. And my girls right now are 8, 6, and 3. So I have a 3rd grader, a 1st grader, and then the 3-year-old's not in school yet. But I've kind of started something going on along with that open communication, because we've all been there, right? We've been children, and we like to think that was a million years ago, but really it might not have been so long ago. Sometimes it's hard to remember, but I sit down with my kids at the start of every year or school year. For my daughter, she's in 3rd grade, and I sat down with her and I said, hey, it's probably seems like forever ago, but I was in 3rd grade once, and I was an 8-year-old once. And I remember sometimes I would get my feelings hurt. And sometimes people would say things that didn't seem kind and weren't nice. Sorry, I tear up every time I talk about my kids. And I told her, if you ever feel that way, you can talk to me about it and we can work through it together. And that seems like a really small thing. But again, that's opening the communication. For when she's 16 and the same thing happens, we've already been talking about it for the past 8 years or whatever. And things will change as you get older, obviously, and like bigger problems, big kids, big problems, little kids, little problems. But just opening that line of communication is like my number one goal as a parent right now.
Yeah, I can attest with a 17-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son,
Yeah.
the importance of that. And, you know, I'm reflecting now back. I asked you, you know, what have you learned, processed from the fact that you told your parents you were going to see a friend? And I'm now reflecting on all the times I didn't have the time or take the time with my children, and how it is more of a struggle later to try to, you know, have them talk about their big kid problems when you brushed aside the little kid problems.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Just opening that trust. I think people in general just need to know that someone cares about them and that someone will listen to them and someone will validate what they're feeling. And that doesn't happen overnight. It needs to start when you're little.
Yeah. So what about the father of these children? I assume we didn't talk about it, but I assume you got remarried.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So I mean, years later, it took me a long time to even talk about what I had experienced with a lot of people. I mean, outside of my therapist, it was just something I kind of brushed under the table, and I feel like there was a lot of guilt and shame there. I was so young and divorced, and I just felt like, you know, again, like a failure and used goods and all the negative connotations that you can think of that go with something like this. And I'm not lovable. No one will ever love me, all those things. So it took a really long time for me to actually open up and be able to talk about it openly and to find people that I trust enough to let into that part of my life. And so eventually I did get married. I found a really great guy who, honestly, when I finally told him about my whole situation and story, I mean, he thanked me for being open and vulnerable and sharing about the abuse and everything that I'd been through. But after that, he was just kind of like, hey, let's go play mini golf or whatever. Like it didn't matter to him. And that's when I mean, it mattered to him, but it didn't, you know what I mean? He didn't care that I'd been through that. He wanted to see who I would become and the person that I actually was. So it's not something that he ever brought up again unless I wanted to talk about it. After we had that one conversation, it was like, okay, thank you for sharing and let's just move on. And he's a really wonderful person. I mean, kind and caring, and he wants to talk about things when I want to talk about it, but won't push it. And he's a wonderful father. And we have 3 little girls, and he has provided for us. And he's just, I mean, I could go on and on. I'm just so thankful that God led me to this new chapter in my life.
Wonderful. So, you know, you've written a book. You are obviously on this podcast. What else are you doing outside your family now with the gift of these past experiences? You know, it says in Hebrews that God chastens every son whom he loves. And obviously, I think it's wrong to think that God is putting us through tests and trials. Rather, God is using the tests and trials that we bring upon ourselves, and he's there with us, right? You're not causing your children to have problems with the kids in third grade, but you're there for them to talk about them and use those experiences to process for growth, right? So it is with God. But what are you doing outside the family with the gift of these experiences?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I did start writing the book because I just felt like I needed to articulate and process some things that had happened. I mean, I feel like I knew what happened. I could tell you what happened, but part of me didn't understand why it all happened. So I just started it as another therapeutic, cathartic way for me to kind of just get some of my thoughts and feelings out. And as I kept writing, I really felt God tugging on my heart, telling me that I just need to keep writing and sharing my story. And it really is vulnerable to share something so deeply personal. It kind of feels a little like leaving your diary on the school bus for everyone to read. And but I felt the tug that I needed to keep going. So it took me a long time, but I eventually finished and put the book out there. And the number of messages that I received from women and just people that have gone through something similar, it's just so humbling to see some of their messages. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I haven't gone through the same thing, but I've experienced something similar. And thank you for giving me the strength to share my story. You know, there's a part in the back of my book where just the very afterthoughts where I talk about, if you know someone that has gone through anything like this, instead of handing them my book and being like, you should read this, open up with them and ask them to share their story of abuse or divorce or whatever, because really people just need to process and talk about what they've gone through. And that's what I hope that I can share, is that you're not alone, that you haven't sunk deeper than God's reaching, and you can open up and share your story, because there really is a healing in the truth. Like we said, the truth can set you free, and there's so much healing in just sharing your story.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alysha. What we're at the end of the hour here. What thoughts do you have to leave with the audience today?
Yeah, thank you, Wade. This has been great. Thank you for this discussion. I really just, my thought is that God knows who you are, and he knows exactly what you're experiencing. And even at times when you feel alone or you think that he doesn't care about you, he is walking beside you, and that he really wants to lift you up, and he wants to lift you out of that. But it's not possible to sink lower than he's able to reach you out. And there's always that light.
Wonderful. As we say here on this show, you were created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. Well, thank you, Alysha. That's it for today. All we have now left is the sneak peek, which will air right after this. Stay tuned, watch it to see who's going to appear on the show next week. And until then, may God be with you. Hey everyone, it's Wade Franson, and I'm in the studio with Claudette Milner. We've actually just pre-recorded the show that you're about to see the sneak peek of. We're so excited to share the life story, really, and the successes of Claudette Milner. She is a prolific author who got her start really in excelling in school and trending towards a career in chemistry, until one of her instructors said, you know what? I think you're going to be a writer. Welcome to the studio, Claudette.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to the listening audience.
Well, I was just so excited in this pre-recording to discover exactly how prolific you are with the 8-part series for young people. And then I think it was over 60 books in a series that's now getting the interest of those who are doing stuff on Netflix. So what can you share about what you've learned over the course of writing all these books to entice the audience to come and hear more?
what I want you to join the conversation. I want you to be able to look at the books and think about how awesome God is, and to be able to examine your own personal relationship with God. And I guarantee you that these books will show you the direction to finding your peace and
Well,
creating
well, I
a
was just going to say, and thank you so much for in the studio recording the show. I was pleasantly surprised at how easily we went into some of the topics that are covered in your series, because you address the topical issues of our day, and you're not afraid to tackle issues like immigration and DEI and racism. And I was kind of surprised at how seamless that was. Do you find you have these conversations often in life?
I find that God gives me these conversations so that I can have them in life. God wants us to know that He's watching. He's hearing the voices of our children, and He wants us to follow up on it. And we have to have these discussions. I think in the very first book, they called it the melting pot that is America. We have to have these discussions.
Well, and God does share that He hears the cries of those who are oppressed. He is the father to the fatherless. He looks after the widows and the orphans. And He expects us to be involved in this as well. And I think that comes out very beautifully in our conversation. So there's a whole lot of wonderful discussion awaiting you when you tune in on August 31st to episode 172 of Created in the Image of God with Claudette Milner. See you there.